Hello and welcome back to the Winning Agenda. My name is Jesse Muleman Marshall, and I'm here with the second part of our Uprising spoiler season roundup. This time we're going to be taking a look at the Iyslander Stormbind cards. Iyslander, of course, the Ice Wizard who was revealed to us in Everfest, and who we are now going to have the opportunity to play as in Classic Constructed as well as in Blitz. So very exciting to dive into this. We've also got a few of the sort of tail end spoilers, in particular some of the legendaries, which hadn't been revealed at the time I did the last video. So it'll be great to go through those, and I'll have a bit of a chat. I'm also going to upload my Iyslander sealed deck from the World Premiere. Went 5-1 in the World Premiere, had a lot of fun, and just done a little sort of video where I talk through my sealed deck. So I'll either add that to the end of this video or I might upload it separately. We'll see how we go. But anyway, let's dive straight in. So we've got Iyslander, of course, we already knew her hero ability. She has Essence of Ice. She's got 36 life. The young version has 18 life, pardon me, which means she can include Ice and Wizard and Elemental cards because she's also an Elemental Wizard hero. And starting on 36 life reflects the fact that Wizards tend to have a bit of an advantage at the start of the game, but also at the end of the game. So no matter who goes first, Wizards can often make a play, although Iyslander a bit less than Kano because of the nature of her ability, but also at the end of the game, getting to play on your opponent's turn means that you have a chance to end it a little more swiftly, or have the final say, which means that starting on less life is a bit of a handicap to reflect that. So if it's not your turn, you may play blue non-attack action cards from your arsenal as though they were an instant. That's Iyslander's ability, which allows her to play on the opponent's turn. So Kano, of course, can pitch 3 resources or pay 3 resources to as an instant as many times as Kano would like, as Kano can afford, that is. Look at the top card of the deck and banish it if it's a non-attack action card and play it as though it were an instant that turn. Iyslander can't play multiple cards necessarily on the opponent's turn, at least through her hero ability. She can only play 1 blue non-attack action card per turn on the opponent's turn from Arsenal, as though it was an instant. However, she also gets this additional ability: whenever you play an ice card during an opponent's turn, create a frostbite token under their control. So this gives Iyslander both a tempo option to try and slow down the opponent, and because wizard cards tend to be more inefficient in terms of resources to damage compared to physical damage cards, this kind of disruptive ability is the sort of thing that can allow Iyslander to slow the opponent down enough to race them. So there's the opportunity we can even see from the hero ability and from the cards as we get into them to operate some kind of tempo aggro control sort of strategy. However, the Frostbite token in combination with other cards that create Frostbite tokens in Iyslander's card pool, we already know from the existing Ice card pool that there are plenty of those, gives Iyslander the opportunity to play a bit of control as well. So Waning Moon is the new weapon. We already had Kraken's Aethervein from Everfest, but Waning Moon gives Iyslander a new way to play more of a higher damage output strategy. So in addition to playing 1 blue non-attack from Arsenal, Waning Moon allows Iyslander to once per turn, meaning that you can do it on your turn once and on your opponent's turn once as an instant, pay 2 resources, deal 2 arcane damage to target hero. If it's not your turn though, you instead deal 3 arcane damage to them. So on their turn, Waning Moon is actually better. It deals 3 damage instead of 2. You can only activate this ability if you've played a non-attack action card this turn. So most wizard damage cards, all the existing cards like Voltic Bolt, Zap, Aether Flare, they're all non-attack actions. So if you play one of those with your action point on your turn and you follow it up with a Waning Moon activation, you're actually allowed to do that because Waning Moon is turned on by the spell that you play on your turn, the non-attack action. On your opponent's turn, if you use Iyslander's ability to play a blue non-attack action card from your arsenal as though it was an instant, then Waning Moon again is turned on, and for 2 resources you can deal 3 arcane damage to your opponent. So the play pattern that you can sort of already imagine just looking at the hero in combination with the weapon is that you want to be prioritizing arsenaling blues, because not only do you get to play them as an instant and surprise your opponent with, a channel like Frigid or some of the other cards that we'll see later on, but you also get to deal them 3 for 2 resources at instant speed on their turn with Waning Moon. Whereas if you don't arsenal that blue card and you're not playing on their turn, you can't even use the Waning Moon at all. So that arsenaling the blue becomes even more important when you have Waning Moon as your weapon. And that's certainly something that's important in the sealed format, but I imagine is also going to be very, very important and a focal point of Iyslander strategies in Constructed. So 3 of the new tricks that Iyslander can play, the rewind on the left is an instant, but the other 2 are pretty important, I think, non-attack actions that don't deal damage but have other effects that Iyslander is going to definitely consider playing. So we'll start with rewind, which is the instant. So it costs 1, it pitches for 3. It says negate target non-attack action card and return it to its owner's hand. Then that hero gains 1 action point. So why this is important is that this effect against heroes, as a sideboard card in Classic Constructed, against heroes that are going to be playing non-attack action cards, can effectively end their turn if it's played at the right time. But in combination with Iyslander's other abilities, including her hero ability to give a frostbite on their turn and her other ways that she can tax the opponent's resources, this card is even more likely to lead to their turn ending or to them having to make some really difficult choices between playing that non-attack action card that you've negated again, or attacking, or potentially not being able to do that at all. For instance, I know Chain's rotating out of Classic Constructed, but you could definitely imagine a situation where Chain was low on resources in the mid-game, wanted to pitch to play a Howl from Beyond from the Banish Zone, and instead you negate that Howl from Beyond and return it to their hand. That could be quite disruptive to their turn. Similarly, if you've got a hero like Briar and they pitch an Earth Blue to play Channel Mat Heroic, and you negate the Channel Mat Heroic and return it to their hand, the fact that they get their action point back, they already would have got that back from the go again on the non-attack action if it had resolved, so that's kind of much of a muchness. But what they don't get back is the resources that they've put into it. So I guess what that illustrates is that Rewind is most powerful against non-attack actions that cost resources, because your opponent doesn't get those back, and they likely haven't factored paying for their non-attack actions twice into their turn plan. But it's also more powerful if you can combine it with disruptive effects that tax their resources as well. So Rewind I can definitely see getting some constructed play, depending on how important non-attack actions are in the new format. And of course, Dromai is a hero that's going to be running a lot of reds, relatively low on resources and a low resource curve, and is going to be trying to cast potentially some very expensive non-attack actions costing up to 6, but likely some that cost between sort of 1 and 3 or 4. And rewinding one of those in a key turn could be extremely strong for Iyslander, who may otherwise struggle to deal with all of Dromai's threats. So Rewind definitely one to keep an eye on. Tome of Duplicity is a non-attack action, so this is one that you'll actually want to put in your arsenal as Iyslander. It costs 3, it's a blue, and it says look at the top 2 cards of your deck, then banish 1. If it's a non-attack action card, you may play it this turn as though it were an instant. So this is generic wizard, so it can be played by Kano, but it's, I think, more useful for Iyslander, because if you have this in your Kano deck, you're paying 3 resources already to Kano, so then paying 3 again to play the Tome of Duplicity is sort of quite expensive for what you get. Yes, you get to opt to, basically, or choose one of them to banish. It's not quite as good as an opt to, you have to choose one of the top 2. And you get to play that one as though it were an instant, so it's like, if you Kano and hit this, it's just a twice as expensive Kano. So that's not great. But in Iyslander, it's very good, because you have the capacity to play this as an instant from your arsenal. You don't need to pay those 3 resources that Kano does, so it really just costs 3, and it effectively gives Iyslander access to a lot of the play patterns that Kano has on the opponent's turn. It means that you are no longer restricted to just playing blues with Iyslander's hero ability. So it's a way, and I guess this is reflected in the name of the card, the Tome of Duplicity, that you are fooling your opponent into thinking that your options are limited in terms of being only blues that you could have in your arsenal, when in fact you can play this and then play a more powerful spell, whether it's either Wildfire or something else from the top of your deck. And then if you've got Stormstriders as well, you can start to combine that, and then even in Classic Constructed, follow it up with a Snapback. So if you've got enough resources, you can start to see situations where you could go Tome of Duplicity from Arsenal, banish an Either Wildfire from the top of my deck, cast the Either Wildfire with, say, Metacarpus nodes, crack Stormstriders, cast the second Either Wildfire from my hand, activating Metacarpus node again, and then cast a Snapback from my hand, activating Metacarpus Node again. And that's a pretty big turn. You know, if your opponent taps out, so to speak, thinking that the most you can do on their turn is likely, you know, one either Wildfire from Arsenal or from hand using your Stormstriders plus one blue card from Arsenal. Instead, you've gone double either Wildfire and, you know, a red Snapback from hand with all those Metacarpus Node activations as well. So basically it just makes your opponents a lot more afraid of you having an Arsenal in terms of what your maximum damage output could be. You don't necessarily have to follow through on that threat each time, but just the existence of a card like Tome of Duplicity is going to change the way that people play around Iyslander and how much they can do on their turn in terms of the fear that they have of the damage that's going to come back the other way. Cold Snap is a really strong card in Limited, I discovered over the weekend, but also I think is going to be a very strong card in Constructed as well, particularly in decks that want to play 5-card hands like Briar. If we do see Briar being a big player in the new metagame, or even if FaB tends to evolve into a strategy that wants to try an Arsenal against Iyslander, then Cold Snap is a really, really good way to shut that down. So it's a 1-cost blue, non-attack action that says target hero may pay 1 resource, and that scales up according to the yellow and the red to 2 and 3. If they don't, freeze a card in their arsenal or an ally they control until the start of your next turn. A frozen object can't be played or activated. If Cold Snap is played from Arsenal, crucially, draw a card. Go again. So the go again doesn't give you an action point on your opponent's turn. However, if you play this on your opponent's turn, you give them a Frostbite from Iyslander's ability. You have this possible freezing of their arsenal, which they have to pay to avoid. You draw a card, giving you more resources on their turn to do things like activate your Waning Moon. So this is basically resource positive, if you like, on your opponent's turn. And you also can then combine it with other cards that you have in your deck that will destroy frozen cards that they have. But even if you don't do that, even if you're not playing other spells on their turn, you have the opportunity to avoid them having a 5-card hand or tax their resources and deny them just that little bit more. So, you know, you can imagine against a Briar that's arsenaled a 0-cost non-attack action that is wanting to, you know, or even a 0-cost attack action card, you know, say they've arsenaled a Snatch. They open up with a non-attack action that costs 0. They want to play all the cards in their turn plus their card in Arsenal for 0. You Cold Snap in the middle of that turn. All of a sudden, after they play their non-attack action and they're about to play their Snatch, you say, well, your Snatch is frozen unless you pay 1, and you get a Frostbite, which could tax up to 2 additional cards out of their hand if they haven't got a blue. So Cold Snap, I think, is going to be a really interesting, disruptive card, and at least has the potential to be quite disruptive. Sorry, I've covered off the resource cost there. I've just realised on the screen. So yeah, it is 1. Cold Snap costs 1. The other card is Ice Eternal, which is an XX spell. So it's again an elemental wizard action. This one. It's an Iyslander specialization. It's got Ice Fusion, and we had seen this one before, but I'll just kind of reiterate it because it ties into a lot of the strategies that we're seeing here. So it's an XX spell, just like Sonata Arcanix, meaning you have to pay X twice. So if you want X to be 2, you have to pay 4 resources, which I think 1, 2, and 3 is probably going to be the most likely numbers. 2 is a very good number in combination with Waning Moon, because if you pitch 2 blues, you can put 4 of those resources into the Ice Eternal, create 2 Frostbites under your opponent's control. Then if Ice Eternal is fused, you get to deal arcane damage to your opponent equal to the number of Frostbites they control. So you pitch 2 blues, spent 4 resources on this, X equals 2, 2 Frostbites, 2 arcane damage, and then you can activate your Waning Moon for another 3 damage to them. So for the cost of 2 blues and the card in your arsenal, you're effectively dealing them 5 damage and giving them 2 Frostbites, which I think is probably not a bad trade. This card does feel quite expensive, so it'll be interesting to see how effective that disruption is. It may be the sort of sideboard card again that you bring in against those matchups where you feel like you need to tax them more. They're less likely to have blues, and this kind of Cold Snap and Ice Eternal style cards will be just disruptive enough to potentially give you back some tempo or slow them down sufficiently. So it's an interesting one to watch. Brain Freeze is the other one I wanted to mention because it's kind of an innocuous looking card at first, but it, again, is going to be a really powerful sideboard card against those decks that are relying on 0 cost cards. So I don't want to keep harping on about Briar, but I think Iyslander is going to have a lot of tools to try and combat Briar in this new format, and Brain Freeze is one of them. It's a 0 cost Ice Fusion Elemental Wizard action. At blue, it says, target opponent reveals their hand. If Brain Freeze was fused, put an action card with cost 0 from their hand on top of their deck. So it can be a non-attack action or an attack action. And what that means is, obviously, the 0 cost restriction, you're not going to want to play this against Bravo, for example. But against a hero like Briar, who could potentially be stuck with hands that either have only one attack action, or only one non-attack action card, and many of their attacks and non-attacks cost 0, you can have a look at their hand after they make their first play on their turn, and remove whatever piece they need the most from the remaining cards in their hand that cost 0. And as I said, because most of the cards in their hand will cost 0, you can potentially remove quite a key piece. So I think it will also have some play against FaB and potentially some other aggressive heroes as well. Against something like Lexi, you can potentially remove their only fuse card if it happens to be, Weave Ice, for example. So Brain Freeze definitely one worth considering, though I think it will be more of a sideboard card as well. But it's just in combination with all these others, you can see that Iyslander is developing quite a suite of disruptive cards at blue that she can play from her arsenal using her hero ability. Iyslander has also got some new damage dealing options in this set. One of them, Singe on the left there, is I've got the red up because I think that's going to be quite important in the limited format to enable Iyslander to deal with Dromai's either Ashwings in particular, because Iyslander doesn't have many attacks or any natural attacks in faction that can take out multiple either Ashwings in one turn if Dromai plays a Rake the Embers and creates 3. Singe is just basically a great counter card to Rake the Embers, to a red Rake the Embers. It is a 1 cost wizard action. At red, it says deal 1 arcane damage to target hero and up to 3 target allies they control. It also blocks for 3. At yellow, it hits the hero and 2 allies, and at blue, it hits the hero and 1 ally. So the blue is not amazing because you're only killing one of their either Ashwings potentially and chipping in 1 on them, although blue non-attack action is very important in Iyslander to enable you to be waning mooning every turn. So if if Singe is serviceable in that slot, but it's not a great return in terms of mana or resources. But red Singe as a sort of specialized tool to deal with Dromai, which is otherwise a bit of a difficult matchup, and clear out those either Ashwings, I think is a very, very, very strong card and is going to be a high pick in draft. Dampen at blue, again, I think is a very, very good tool in the sideboard in Limited in particular, but also will probably have some constructed applications when Iyslander is lining up either against another wizard or against a Runeblade or another hero that's threatening some arcane damage. So Dampen costs 2 and it only deals 2 arcane damage, which is well below rate or slightly below rate. It's basically 1 less than the equivalent Voltic Bolt or Ice Bolt rate. So if you play this from your arsenal, you're threatening 2 damage, and then you also get to prevent the next X arcane damage that would be dealt to your hero this turn, where X is the damage dealt by Dampen. So this can both deal 2, but then, for instance, if your opponent has 2 rune chants, it can prevent 2 damage from 2, like 1 from each of 2 rune chants. It can prevent the damage from Rosetta Thorn. It can prevent damage from an opponent's arcane damage spell, an opposing wizard, for example. So it's got quite a few applications, and I think is going to be one of the more flexible sideboard cards for Iyslander to consider against any other deck that's threatening arcane damage. And it's a pretty powerful arsenal, I think, in those situations. The cost of 2 rather than 1 is a little bit annoying, and you'd almost rather it deal 1 arcane damage but cost 1. In order that you could play the Dampen and use your Waning Moon off a blue. I did find that a couple of times, particularly in Limited, but yeah, it remains to be seen whether that becomes too much of a restrictive factor for it to see playing constructed. The other 3 cards, of course, are the new Ice Wizard damage dealers that mimic the existing Wizard damage dealers. So Frosting is a 0 for 3 at red, Either Hail is a 1 for 4, and Ice Bolt is a 2 for 5, which mimics, of course, Zap, Scalding Rain, and Voltic Bolt. The on-hit elemental wizard actions are also really, really interesting. So they all have Ice Fusion. Icebind, I've got the blue because I think the ability is perhaps more important than the damage dealing, whereas for Polar Cap and either Ice Vein, I think the reds are pretty strong. So Icebind is a 0-cost blue. Says deal 1 arcane damage to any target. If Icebind was fused, it deals damage to a hero. Freeze a card in their arsenal until the start of your next turn. A frozen object can't be played or activated. So this requires a hit in order to do the freeze, and it is only dealing 1 at blue, but I think it's a pretty nice threat to be throwing out from a blue. So if you compare this to Either Dart, which is the vanilla wizard non-attack action, which basically just costs 0 and deals 1 arcane damage, you'd almost always rather have the Icebind, even though it requires the Ice Fusion. The fact that you've got this effectively on-hit ability makes it a lot more powerful. So I think this one is going to see play in both Constructed and Limited as a good, strong blue that has a very relevant, I think, on-hit ability as well. Polar Cap, the on-hit on this one is basically to create a Frostbite. It costs 2 and it scales from 4, 3, 2 at red, yellow, and blue. And either Ice Vein is pretty strong. I mean, funnily enough, similar on-hit effect to Chilling Ice Vein. But this one, of course, is an arcane damage dealer rather than arrow. At red, it costs 3 Ice Fusion. Deal 5 arcane damage to any target. At yellow, it's 4. Blue, it's 3. If it was fused and deals damage to a hero, they discard a card unless they pay 2 resources. And this is something that Wizard hasn't really had access to before. As I said, it's really cool how it overlaps with the other ice hero, Lexi, that we've seen, and her ability to, put this similar on-hit effects onto the generic Ranger template. We're now seeing those ice on-hit effects being put onto the generic Wizard template of arcane damage dealing non-attack actions. So that's kind of neat way to tie together the designs of these different heroes using the same element. And I think either Ice Vein, like Chilling Ice Vein, is going to be a pretty important card in the Iyslander decks that are trying to deny tempo, deny resources, and deny large hands. So there's a couple of legendaries that Iyslander can use in the new set. The first is Alluvion Constellus. It says, the first time Alluvion Constellus prevents arcane damage each turn, if it has less than 4 energy counters, you may put an energy counter on it. As an instant, you can remove 2 energy counters from it, and the next staff ability you activate this turn costs 3 less. So this can affect both Waning Moon and Kraken's Aether Vein, both of which cost 2 and 3 respectively, basically making them free for 1 turn. And what you need to do in order to be able to do that is use Alluvion Constellus on 2 turns throughout the game to prevent arcane damage. So again, against a Runeblade, against another wizard, against any hero that's throwing out even incidental arcane damage, if you can get a free activation of your weapon, even once in a game, that's a pretty powerful effect for a piece of equipment. So I think Alluvion Constellus may seem underwhelming. It may look niche. It may be one of those things where you're like, it'd be good if they would stop printing things that are only good in some matchups or only good sideboard cards. But there are a large number of heroes in the pool that threaten small amounts of arcane damage at least, particularly Runeblades and Wizards. And Alluvion Constellus, I think, in all those matchups is going to be really, really strong. Coronet Peak is a headpiece. It has an action which doesn't have go again. The action costs 3, and it says target hero discards a card unless they pay 1. It's got Blade Break, and it blocks for 2, which is quite a lot, because this is something that... so this is an ice equipment, so any ice hero can use it. Lexi, unlikely to use it, given how important New Horizon is, but certainly Oldhim might consider it over Skullcap. And the ability to spend 3 resources to deny a card on your turn from your opponent, for a hero like Oldhim that often wants to sort of pass their turn and just block on the opponent's turn, if they do end up, or swing their weapon and then arsenal and pass, if they do end up with their opponent having a down turn, and so they end up with 3 cards left in hand, 1 to attack with the weapon, 1 to arsenal, and a spare 1, then Coronet Peak can give them a great way to use that to strip a card out of their opponent's hand. So Coronet Peak could be pretty powerful in Oldhim, and I think Also, in combination with the new ice denial cards that we've seen, like either Ice Vein, could be a strong strategy, a strong piece of the strategy for Iyslander as well, where she is able to, successfully shut down a hero's turn with frostbites, etc., and then wants to try and keep up the denial for the following turn. So Coronet Peak, I think a pretty strong piece of equipment. I didn't expect the Blade Break 2 on this. I think that's very, very powerful. We also got some new generics in this set, which is the first time in a couple of sets since Monarch that we've seen new generic Majestics or new generic cards at all. And these ones are pretty strong. So Erase Face is a 2-for-6 generic attack action. It says, when Erase Face hits a hero, cards and tokens they own lose all class and talent types until the end of their next turn. This might look innocuous, but a lot of people, obviously, given the stat line, 2 cost and 6 power, are comparing it to Command and Conquer. And it doesn't have it's not as difficult to block as Command and Conquer because it doesn't have the evasion of not being able to be blocked by non-attack actions. But the on-hit ability against aggro decks is super, super powerful. So like Command and Conquer, a lot of the time it's actually against those aggro decks, just taking the 2 cards out of their hand to block it and depriving them of the opportunity not to block that's most important. Although Command and Conquer does have that additional benefit against defensive decks that it's harder for them to block. Whereas Erase Face is most powerful against aggro decks that don't want to be blocking, because against 5, for example, they can't have any Draconic Chain Links. Against Lexi, they can't have any Ice Fusion. And denying them that or forcing them to commit 2 cards to block this is really, really strong. So Erase Face is going to see heaps of play in those aggro mirrors, and is going to be a very, very strong card. That all you got is a generic defense reaction. It's a yellow 0-for-3 defense reaction, and it says, while this is defending an attack action with 2 or less power, when the combat chain closes, draw a card. So this is a way for you to gain card advantage. Like, this seems really, really strong to me. Against any deck that's going wide and going to be throwing, a lot of small attacks at you, the ability to shut down one of those attacks as long as it's 2 or less and then draw back the card is very strong. Obviously, there are lots of effects in those decks that will buff either as an attack reaction or an instant speed, so you have to be careful of that. They can obviously deny you the card in response to this, but it seems powerful on the surface. The ability is pretty strong. And the last one is Fog Down. So Fog Down is a 3-cost generic aura. It says, non-attack action cards lose and can't gain go again. At the beginning of your action phase, destroy Fog Down, and it blocks for 3. So 3 to play is pretty expensive, and yellow is not ideal. We've got 2 yellow generics here, but Fog Down's as close as we've gotten to something that can be a straight-up Time Walk, I think, in this format. So non-attack action cards lose and can't gain go again basically means that any deck that is relying on setting that up, whether it's Chain can't play non-attack actions. This would be devastating against Chain to hold and drop later in the game. Channel Lake Frigid is expensive and difficult in those situations, but Fog Down actually says you can't play out your Bounding Demigons, you can't play out your Unhallowed Rites, anything that requires a non-attack action to be played first, and you can't turn on your Rosetta Thorn, which significantly neuters Chain. It is also very, very strong against Briar and any of the other Rune Blades that want to combine non-attack and attack action cards, and very strong against Dromai, who is wanting to play her invocations to summon dragons, which are all non-attack action cards, and then follow those up with attacks. This basically means that Dromai can't do that. So she can summon the dragon, but then it just sits there waiting for you to hit it on the following turn. So Fog Down, a great way to gain some tempo or to deny your opponent at a crucial point in the game from executing their game plan. Remains to be seen how effective that is and how many matchups people are going to want it in the new format, but I can certainly think of a couple where it will be very relevant. So the other legendaries just want to touch on quickly before we finish up. Flamescale Furnace, this is the Draconic chest equipment. Extremely strong stat line, so 2 block with temper, meaning that you can get your 2 block out of it. It stays around. You get to still use this once per turn instant that says pay 1 resource, gain a resource for each red card in your pitch zone. Activate this ability only if you've played a red card this turn. So in either Dromai or Phi, this is going to act very much like a Teklo Foundry Heart. So as long as you've pitched 2 red cards, you can then activate this and gain 2 resources back for your 1. So it's basically netting you a resource as long as you've pitched 2 reds already, and as long as you've played a red, which both Dromai and FaB want to do. So both the strong stat line for a chest and the strong ability, I think, mean this is one of the best cards in the set, really. Ghostly Touch is the last one. So this is an illusionist equipment and arms. This one's a bit of a confusing card. So whenever an illusionist attack you control is destroyed by Phantasm, you put a haunt counter on Ghostly Touch. And then once per turn, you can remove a haunt counter from it. And the gloves itself, like Ghostly Touch, becomes an illusionist ally with Phantasm, base power and toughness equal to the number of haunt counters on it. And once per turn, pay 3, attack, go again. So the interesting to note that the attack from the Ghostly Touch doesn't actually have go again. It's the once per turn action to remove it and activate it or animate it that has go again. So the attack itself doesn't. The attack itself also has Phantasm, and because of those 2 things, it's potentially quite limited. It also requires your Phantasm attacks to be destroyed over the course of the game, but in a deck that's very heavy on Phantasm, whether it's Heralds in Prism, who didn't have an amazing glove piece, Dreamweavers is okay, but a lot of Prisms were playing Gauntlets, Ironhide Gauntlets. If you played this instead in Prism and you're playing a very Herald-heavy build, even in a matchup where your Heralds are getting popped a lot and you're getting 2 for 1 effectively, at some point later in the game, you can potentially come at them with a big, 10 or 11 power attack, and they have to honor that. Like, they have to be aware that that's a threat. But it does seem like in those kind of matchups, your Ghostly Touches are just going to get popped because they're going to have Phantasm as well. So I kind of am a bit unsure about exactly where this one's going to fit in, but certainly the fact that this can rack up counters to become a very strong attack, with potentially 7, 8, 9, 10 counters on it, means that it can potentially be something that isn't costing you a card because it's an equipment that's already in play, and it's only costing you 3 resources to make the attack, and could potentially have quite high power. So yeah, very interesting card, very different design space, but not sure exactly how well it's going to function and in what matchups. So that brings us to the end. Thank you for watching our preview series for Uprising. It was great to play in the World Premiere and get a chance to get our hands on some of these cards in the first opportunity, and very much looking forward to pre-releases this weekend. So wherever you are, hope you enjoy playing the pre-releases. Hope you've enjoyed this little chat and insight into the Uprising sealed format, and into some of the new cards that we've seen. And if you've got any favorite cards or any cards that we didn't mention today, feel free to chime in the comments and let us know, and we'll have some more content very shortly. Thanks so much for watching.